Hi, everyone. Here I am again. It's almost new moon. It's not quite new moon. Today's Tuesday, new moon is Thursday, but I'm recording it today because tomorrow and Thursday are busy days. So here we are today. But it's good in the sense that ahead of it, there's some things I'm going to be doing, the questions I usually ask myself around this time of the month. And I want to just preface all of this again with as woo as following the moon cycle could seem, I'm not, it's like I don't know why I have to justify this, but I do this and I have done this to myself. So here we are justifying this, but justification for following a moon cycle. It's because a cycle opens up into a spiral. If you think about how a seed gets planted, an acorn gets planted, it's going to become an oak tree, but not the same oak tree. It's going to be a different one. That's the idea of the spiral. When you enter a labyrinth, which also is a spiral of sorts, you fully expect to come back out again. And ideally, you come back out because of what you intended and what you were pondering differently or new. So a spiral implies this ability not to have to keep circling the same old shit, but being able to learn, to grow, to change, and to evolve. So following the moon cycle, it's like there's a built-in way to be able to deal with grief, which is new moon. New moon represents metaphorically, right in the sky above us, too, this idea that death and life, death and birth, not death and life, it's death and birth are the ones that we tend to set as opposites. Both are contained within life, absolutely. But death and birth, and the new moon represents death. And I want to read two of the things that I've written down that I'm going to be working with, just because this is a good place to start unfluffing ourselves. We are such a death phobic culture, and it happens. It happens every minute of every day. Rob and I were talking last night. I'm doing life project histories with my death doula course. So, a series of questions and then an interview just to start thinking about what you might want at the end. What were your most important memories? What would you like people to think about you? Or what were words that describe your life if your life had a title? So, just poking around in this area, trying to make it a little more normal and not something that is off at the edge, on those old maps where it said monsters be here. You don't want it out there. You want this in close and not in a morbid way, but in a way that it helps focus on your life. So, some of the questions that I do at the new moon to help me think about the endings, yes, I'm going to be planting seeds, but eventually a seed will crack open. And that's not a failure of the seed. That is what keeps it going and progressing and that evolving. And life is the punchline of this. You get another go, not in the sense of reincarnation, even, but in your daily life, begin again. That's what Rob and I were talking about, this ability to start over, to perceive yourself, and to learn and to expand. So, some of the questions I'll ask myself are, what part of me is ready to rot so something truer can root? So I journal about these, whether it's talking out loud or write it down. I do not have a formal journal. I have pieces of paper that lay around. So I don't necessarily go back to them, but it helps me unpack maybe some of this interiority and helps it put it outside so that I can reflect on it. It isn't me anymore as much as it becomes a we, a reflection, somewhere where I can bounce myself off myself symbolically. Another question, what identity am I clinging to that's actually compost? And an identity that, and clinging is such a weird word. I get this, and in a way, yes, but there's also a clinging that is done in a lighter way after you've worked with something. So I've been working with my mom's dementia, my mom's suffering, and a death of sorts, little ones in increments for a very long time. And in terms of this compost and this clinging, I'm clinging lightly to this, and she hasn't passed, so I don't know how that will be. I know how it is in all these smaller increments. And I find myself clinging to an identity that was my mom that was never really my mom. Um, I had this idea of who she was. And through being with her and talking to her and going back and forth to endless doctors and places where she's losing her mind, but is still very present in her nursing head. My mom was the graduate, the valedictorian of her 1957 class from Northwestern downtown. And I find that amazing. This is the mom that I didn't know. I didn't know that part of my mom. But now the nursing brain of hers is the part that is very strong and doesn't suffer really from dementia. So I have these conversations with her that are very deep and very clinical. And that was my mom too, not very emotion forward, not very empathetic, but very in the service of caring. She would have made a beautiful hospice nurse too, in the sense of shepherding people and letting them know the facts, this kind of thing. So the identity that I cling to of my mom is broken up. It's vastly broken up. I don't have a set thing anymore that I think of when I think of mom. And so, in that sense, an identity that I'm clinging to that would be better compost, I am composting my mom, my identity with my mom, what it was to be a daughter, what it was to have her be the authority. And now I'm the authority. I'm making the decisions for her. And that was a very heartbreaking thing to come to. Still is, but necessary because she needs it. I'm here. There's no one else that can do this. When I walk in, I see the relief in her eyes. She grabs my hand, and this too is not the mom that I knew. So all these identities are shifting. And as I'm talking about this, the emotions coming up, and this too helps with my voice, helps with expression of these things that honestly are too hard to hold. So the third is, can I let the unknown feel like a womb and not a tomb? So I think that might be the silent intention behind my doula work, behind my pre-grieving my mom. You know, my girls are moving. Fee's already moved to Oregon. Zoe and Ian will be moving there. And this is loss too. But in all the losses, there's also this beautiful sense of beginning. And that is what the new moon encapsulates, is there's such loss and grief, but there's also birth and excitement. And there's a thing called the learning gap. Whenever you're learning something new, the feeling there is identified as frustration. And one of the things I've been trying to do, I have post-it notes written up for myself on this, but what if the feeling of learning weren't frustration? What if it were excitement? Those two are so closely aligned, I think. A skateboarder learning a new trick, a kid as he's falling off his bike, there's still excitement. And even in pregnancy, which also is a death and a birth in so many ways, there's excitement there. Yeah, there's frustration, but and a lot of other things, but there's also a looking forward to. And that's, I think, where we really need to implement our there is hope in the future. There is hope in new beginnings. Out of all these endings come new beginnings. And we are so, I am, but I think collectively so focused on the endings and the breakdowns and the composting. But I have so much shit in my compost pile. That's what it's for. It's not a death or a loss in that self. It's a beginningness of something new. So to shuffle these feelings of grief, to be able to encompass my mom, and this makes me think of another beautiful thing this week. But how about this? The idea that Pieta, which is Mary holding Jesus, Michelangelo carved it. Although I think Pieta is a word for a much bigger subject, like maybe just women holding dead things. I don't know. Hmm. Well, that's something to look up. But the Pieta, not just mourning death, but holding it with such complete openness that resurrection becomes possible. So, the Pieta, or the idea of not just mourning death, but holding it with such complete openness that resurrection becomes possible. So, that's my thoughts for the new moon. Just a lightness of being here and recognizing that it is a portal, metaphorically, symbolically, but aren't we all a portal for life to become? So that to me goes back to that justification. It's just justification looks like changing a viewpoint. It doesn't have to be we believe it. Myths are true in the fact that they unfold, that they become. They're not true in a linear sense, in a logical sense. They were never meant to be. But as these things unfold, they help us become and they help guide us. So let that new moon be a place, a pause, where this Thursday you can be present with yourself as you are becoming, not locked into the past, not destined for a specific future, but the willingness and the openness to be present, to hold your life, to be responsible and accountable to the fact that you're here and you have choices. And sometimes they're hard, but out of every death comes a birth and a new reality, a new way of being, and a new becoming. And grieving takes place, and grieving is so important and so hard. But what else are you going to do? There's a beautiful other side to it. And I think that's Rumi meant, there's a field beyond wrong and right. I'll meet you there. Goodbye. Thank you. And I will see you soon. And blessings on your journey.